Welcome to Yaun's story. The boy who live in a small village, and he want to go to town. So, let's listen together. One in the country of Akim, in the hills far back from the coast, there was a simple man who had never been far from home, and he spent his time at farming and hunting like the other people of the village. He had often heard talk about the big town of Accra by the ocean, and all the wonderful things to be found there, but he had never seen it. He had never been farther from his village than the river. But one day Yaun had to go to Accra. He put on his best clothes, and took his knife and put it in his belt. He wrapped some food in a cloth and put it on his head and started out. He walked many days, and the road was hot and dusty. After a while he was out of his own country, and people didn't speak Akim, which was his language, anymore. He came closer and closer to Accra. There were many people and donkeys on the way, all going to town or coming back from town, more people than he had ever seen on the road before. Then he saw a great herd of cows grazing by the edge of the road. He had never seen so many cows in his life. He stopped and looked at them in wonder. He saw a little boy herding the cows and he went up to him and said, "Who is the owner of all these cattle?" But the boy didn't understand Yaun, because Yaun spoke Akim, while in Accra they spoke the Ga language, and he replied, "Minu," which meant, "I don't understand." He continued into his way into the town. He was very impressed with everything he saw. He came to a large building and stopped to look at it. It was made of stone, and it was very high. He shook his head. There was nothing like this back in the hills. When a woman came by on her way to market, Yaun spoke to her. "What a tremendous house," he said. "What rich person can own such a building?" But the woman don't know what Yaun was saying, because he talked Akim and she knew only Ga, so she replied to him, "Minu." Minu. That meant again. Yaun was overcome. No one back in Akim had ever been so wealthy as Minu. As he went farther and farther into the town they kept seeing more wonders. He came to the market. It covered a space larger than all the houses in Yaun's village. He walked through the center of it, and he saw the women selling things that were rare in his village, like iron pots and iron spoons. "Where do all those things come from?" Yaun asked a little girl. She smiled at him. "Minu," she replied. Yaun was silent. Everything was Mayan. Minu everywhere. Part 2. The crowd was very great. People pushed and shoved, for it was the market day and everyone within walking distance had come to sell or buy. Yaun had never seen so many people in one place. The stories he had heard about Accra hadn't done it justice. He stopped an old man with a drum under his arm and said, "So many people, all at one time. What makes so many people all come to Accra?" "Minu," the old man said. Yaun was overwhelmed. What influence that Minu had. People come to Accra in great crowd just because of him. How ignorant folks back in the village were of this great person. He went out of the market down to the ocean's edge. Lying in the water were many little fishing boats with the sails, the first Yaun had ever seen. "Wah! To whom do all these boats belong?" he asked a fisherman standing on the beach. "Minu," the fisherman replied. Yaun walked away and came to where a large iron cargo ship was being loaded with palm oil and fruit. Smoke came out of its stacks in huge black clouds, and hundreds of men swarmed over its decks. "Ha!" Yount said in great excitement to a man carrying a stalk of bananas on his head. "This must be the largest boat in the world." "Minu," the man said. "Yes, I know. That much I guessed," Yount said. "But where is all the fruit going?" "Minu," the man said, and went up onto the deck of the ship. Yount was overcome. Minu was indeed a great man. He owned everything. He ate everything. You couldn't ask a question but people would answer Minu. Minu here, there, everywhere. "I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it," Yount said. "They ought to call Accra Minu's town. How wonderful it would be to have Minu's great wealth." Yount then transacted his business in Accra, and again he wrapped food in his cloth and set it on his head and started out for home. When he came to the edge of the town, he saw a great procession and heard the beating of drums. He came close and saw it was a funeral. Men were carrying a coffin and women were crying out in mourning. It was the impressive funeral Yount had ever seen. He pushed his way into the crowd and looked. And to one of the mourners he said, "Who is this person who has died?" And the mourner replied sadly, "Minu." "What? The great Minu is dead?" Yount said. "The men who owned the cattle and the tall house, the sailing boats and the iron steamship. The men whose reputation has crowded the marketplace beyond belief. Oh, poor Minu. He had to leave all his wealth behind. He has died just like an ordinary person." Yount continued his way out of the city, but he couldn't get the tragedy of Minu from his mind. "Poor Minu," he said over and over again. "Poor Minu."